The colony world of Haven was not a place where many great events happened. It was a quiet human settlement on the edge of explored space. Fields of silver grass stretched to the horizon, small cities with shining domes stood under a pale sun, and life was steady. People worked in farms, traded in markets, and lived without fear of war. But all of that changed the day the alien ship arrived. At first, it appeared as a shadow across the sky. The sun dimmed when the enormous vessel passed over the colony. Children stopped playing, workers dropped their tools, and every eye lifted upward. The ship was black and silver, carved with glowing symbols that pulsed like living fire. It was so large that it covered half the city in its shadow. For many, it looked like a floating mountain made of steel. The colony leaders quickly called a gathering in the Grand Square. Citizens rushed to see what would happen. No one dared to resist or to fight, because they all knew the symbols on that ship. It belonged to the Seraph Empire, a civilization feared across many stars. Wherever the Seraph came, rulers bent their knees and enemies fell silent. And leading them today was the one figure who caused fear even among her own kind, the Seraph Princess. The ship's doors opened with a heavy roar. A beam of light stretched down to the center of the square, and out of it walked alien guards in shining armor. Their helmets hid their faces, their spears glowed with energy, and their steps echoed across the stone ground. The crowd shrank back. Mothers pulled children close, traders shut their stalls, and silence filled the air. Then she appeared. The alien princess stepped forward. Her skin glowed faint blue, and her eyes burned like white fire. Strange markings, almost like stars, moved slowly across her arms and neck as if alive. Her gown was woven from silver threads that shimmered with every step. She did not need to speak to command attention. Every person in the square could feel the weight of her presence, heavy and sharp, like the air before a storm. The guards bowed deeply. The colony leaders lowered their heads. Even the animals in the fields went silent, as if the world itself feared her. Stories about her had traveled across space for years. Some called her cursed. Others said her power was too great for mortals to stand before. Whatever the truth, one fact was clear. Wherever she walked, people trembled. The princess stopped in the center of the square. She looked around at the sea of bowed heads. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was calm but carried across the entire city without effort. "You know who I am," she said. "You know what I bring." No one dared answer. The silence was broken only by the sound of the ship above, its engines humming like thunder trapped in the sky. But then something unusual happened. Among the thousands of bowed figures, one man stood tall. His name was Daniel. He was a human farmer, strong from years of working the land, but simple in dress and plain in appearance. He had no weapon, no armor, no guard to protect him. Yet he did not lower his head. He stood with his hands at his sides, watching the princess directly, as if she were no different from any other visitor. The crowd gasped. Some whispered in fear. Others pulled away from him, as if his act of defiance would bring death upon them all. The guards noticed too. Their spears hummed louder, ready to strike. But the princess raised her hand slightly, stopping them. Her glowing eyes narrowed as she looked at Daniel. Slowly, she stepped closer. Each movement sent ripples of energy across the ground, and people nearby shivered. She stopped only a few feet away from him. Daniel did not move. His face was calm, his eyes steady. The princess tilted her head. "Everyone is afraid of me," she said. Her voice was softer now, filled with curiosity instead of command. But why are you not human? Daniel's voice was steady when he replied. Because fear only has power if I allow it. The words hung in the air like a spark. The crowd could not believe what they had heard. No one had ever spoken to the princess in such a way. No one dared. And yet here was a simple man from a colony, standing tall, refusing to tremble. The princess studied him. Her eyes, which once blazed like fire, now held a hint of something else. Perhaps confusion. Perhaps interest. It was the first time in her life that someone had not treated her like a monster to fear. Around them, the crowd remained frozen. No one breathed too loudly. They expected punishment, perhaps destruction. But nothing came. The princess simply looked at Daniel, as if he had opened a door she had never seen before. High above, the alien ship hovered silently, waiting for her command. The guards stood ready, unsure of what would happen next. The leaders of the colony trembled, their knees shaking against the stone. But in that moment, only two figures mattered. The feared princess of the Seraph Empire, and the human who refused to bow. The air between them was heavy, yet filled with something new. A story was about to begin, one that would not only change Daniel's life but also the destiny of the princess who had never known what it meant to be seen without fear. The square remained silent after Daniel's words. His reply was simple, but it carried weight that no one could ignore. The alien guards tensed, waiting for a signal from their princess. The colony leaders held their breath. Everyone thought the human farmer had signed his death by speaking so boldly. Yet the princess did not strike him down. She only studied him with eyes that glowed like distant suns. She stepped closer until the edge of her gown brushed the stone ground between them. Her voice was calm, but it cut through the silence like a blade. Fear only has power if you allow it. That is what you said, human. Do you truly believe this? Daniel's voice did not shake. Yes. I believe it. The crowd murmured in disbelief. To them, the princess was a figure of terror. To stand before her was to feel the weight of storms, the burn of fire, and the chill of endless night. Yet this one man stood tall, as if she were no more than a traveler passing through his land. The princess tilted her head, her markings glowing faintly as they shifted across her skin. Others kneel before me. Entire worlds tremble. My voice alone can bring armies to their knees. Why do you not fall as they do? Why do you not lower your eyes, as even my own council does? Daniel looked at her directly. Because respect is not the same as fear. If I bow only because I am afraid, then my action has no worth. To me, courage is choosing to stand, even when the world tells you to kneel. The words struck the princess in a place she rarely allowed herself to feel. Her guards glanced at one another. They expected her anger, but instead she was silent, almost thoughtful. Finally, she spoke again. Tell me your name, human. Daniel. The princess let the name settle in her mind. Simple, direct, unlike the heavy titles of her empire. Daniel, she repeated slowly. You are bold. Too bold, some would say. At this, one of her guards stepped forward, his spear glowing brighter. Princess, he insults your honor. Shall I strike him down? But once again she raised her hand, halting the guard. Her eyes never left Daniel. No. He will not be punished. Instead, I will test him myself. The crowd gasped. The leaders of Haven exchanged nervous glances. What did she mean by a test? What fate awaited the human who dared to stand without fear? The princess turned, her gown flowing like liquid silver under the pale sun. She looked back at Daniel. "Walk with me, human. Let us see if your courage is more than words." Daniel did not hesitate. He stepped forward, following her toward the beam of light that led up to the ship. The crowd parted, silent, as the strange pair passed through. The guards surrounded them, but their weapons stayed low. The people of Haven watched as Daniel disappeared into the beam, swallowed by the light. Inside the ship, the air was colder. The walls pulsed with faint energy, and the floor shone with silver lines that seemed to move like rivers of light. Strange machines hummed in the distance, their purposes unknown. The ship itself felt alive, as if it breathed with them. The princess walked with steady steps, and Daniel followed close behind. He did not speak at first, but his eyes moved across the walls, the patterns, the shadows. He was curious, not afraid. "You do not tremble," the princess said after a moment. "Even here, inside the heart of my empire's power." Daniel answered calmly. "What is there to gain by trembling? Fear will not change what happens next." The princess glanced at him, her eyes narrowing slightly, though not in anger. "You are unlike the others I have met. Even the rulers of great worlds bend their knees before me. Yet you, a farmer from a forgotten colony, stand as though we are equals." Daniel shrugged. "I do not see monsters when I look at you. I see someone who carries power, yes, but also someone who is still a person. Maybe others only see your strength. I choose to see more." Her steps slowed for a moment. His words echoed in her thoughts. For so long, she had been treated as a force, not as a person. To many, she was fear made flesh, a storm in human shape. But this man dared to look beyond that. They reached a wide hall where enormous cages lined the walls. Inside them were beasts unlike anything Daniel had seen before. Some had wings of bone, others had eyes that glowed red like molten rock. Their growls shook the air, and their claws scraped against the energy barriers that contained them. Any normal person would have backed away in terror. But Daniel only observed them with steady eyes. The princess noticed. "Do these creatures not frighten you? They are bred for war. Each could tear through steel as though it were cloth." "They are dangerous," Daniel admitted, "but they are still alive, like all creatures. I see no reason to fear what I cannot change. Fear is wasted when it does not protect." Again, his answer unsettled her. She had expected panic, perhaps even trembling. Instead, she found only calm words, simple but firm. They moved deeper into the ship. Servants appeared, bowing so low their foreheads touched the floor. Their eyes never rose to meet hers. They hurried to obey, but their movements shook with fear. The princess watched them with a hidden sadness. Then she looked at Daniel, who stood straight, unbowed, watching her instead of the ground. "Do you see?" she asked him quietly. "Even my own people look upon me with terror. It has been this way since I was a child. They obey me, but they do not trust me. They follow my orders, but they never see me as one of them." Daniel's expression softened. "That must be a lonely way to live." Her steps faltered again. She had not expected such words. No one dared to call her lonely. No one even considered that possibility. Yet when he said it, it rang true in her heart. For the first time, the alien princess felt her power shift. It was not the fear of her guards or the trembling of her servants that moved her now. It was the steady gaze of a single human, who refused to be broken by the shadow she cast. As they continued deeper into the ship, she realized something unexpected. This meeting, this simple farmer's courage, might change more than she had ever thought possible. The ship's corridors grew wider as Daniel followed the princess. Lights shimmered across the walls like streams of liquid silver. The air carried a low hum, as though the vessel itself whispered secrets only the Seraph could understand. Daniel walked with steady steps, his eyes moving over every detail. He had never seen technology like this, but instead of feeling small, he felt curious. The princess glanced at him now and then. Most beings who entered her ship bent under the pressure of fear. They trembled, sometimes fainted, when they passed near her cages of war beasts or when the hum of the ship grew louder. But Daniel kept walking, calm as if he were on a morning stroll through the fields of Haven. "You surprise me," she said finally. "Others fall apart when they walk these halls. But you remain steady." Daniel answered without hesitation. "Fear is natural, but it does not have to rule me. If I let fear control me, I would stop living. I would only be surviving." The princess studied him as they entered a vast chamber. The room rose high above, its roof vanishing into shadows. Along the walls hung banners of the Seraph Empire, marked with the same glowing patterns that moved across her skin. At the center of the chamber was a platform surrounded by energy pillars. Inside the glowing field, mechanical shapes shifted and turned. Daniel stopped to watch. The machines looked like giant soldiers made of steel and light. Their arms ended in blades, their chests glowed with power, and their heads turned with sharp precision. The guards who stood nearby kept their distance, as if even they feared the machines. The princess lifted her hand toward them. "These are guardians of my empire. Each one is stronger than 100 soldiers. Their purpose is to crush enemies who dare resist us." Daniel observed the machines with a calm face. "Impressive," he said. "But do they think for themselves, or do they only follow?" "They follow," she replied. "Obedience is their strength. Obedience is also the law of my empire." Daniel's lips pressed together in thought. "Then they are powerful, but empty. A tool is strong, but it cannot grow. Only living beings can choose to change." The princess turned her gaze on him. "You speak of choice as if it is greater than power." "Sometimes it is," Daniel said. "A choice can change the path of history. Power without choice is only weight. It crushes everything beneath it." Her eyes glowed brighter for a moment, and her markings shifted faster. She stepped closer, her presence pressing down like a storm. "You are bold to say this in front of me, human. Do you not fear that I could end you with a thought?" Daniel did not move. "You could, yes. But if you did, then my words would still remain. And maybe, one day, they would return to you." For a long moment, silence filled the chamber. The guards waited, tense, unsure if their princess would unleash her wrath. But instead of anger, she gave a faint sound that might almost have been a laugh. It was soft, low, and quickly gone, but it was there. "You are unlike any creature I have met," she said. "Very well, Daniel. If you claim courage, then you must face a test. Not words, but actions." She lifted her hand, and the machines inside the energy field stopped moving. The pillars dimmed, and the glowing barrier dissolved. Slowly, one of the steel guardians stepped out, its heavy feet shaking the floor. It towered over Daniel, its blade-like arm shining with light. "Stand against it," the princess said. "Show me if your courage is true." The guards gasped. The servants who had entered the chamber dropped to their knees. No one dared face a guardian alone. Yet Daniel did not protest. He squared his shoulders and looked up at the machine. The Guardian advanced, its steps echoing like thunder. Its blade arm lifted high, ready to strike. Daniel did not reach for a weapon because he had none. He only moved to the side, quick and sharp, letting the blade crash into the floor where he had stood a moment before. Sparks flew across the stone. The machine turned with mechanical precision. Daniel kept moving, always just beyond the strike. His breath grew heavier, but his eyes stayed clear. The crowd of guards and servants watched in awe. No farmer should have survived even the first blow, yet Daniel was still standing. The princess studied every motion. Her glowing eyes followed his movements. She saw no panic, only focus. His steps were not those of a trained warrior, yet his will gave him strength. He faced the Guardian as if facing a storm in the fields, refusing to bow to wind or rain. Finally, as the Guardian swung again, Daniel dropped low and grabbed a piece of broken metal from the floor. With a sharp thrust, he jammed it into the machine's leg. Sparks burst, and the giant stumbled for a moment. The blow did not destroy it, but it slowed its advance. The princess raised her hand. The Guardian froze in place, its blade hanging mid-swing. Silence filled the chamber once more. Daniel stood tall, sweat on his brow, chest rising and falling, but his eyes still steady. The princess stepped forward. You could not defeat it? Yet you did not run. You faced it with nothing but your will. Daniel nodded. I never thought I could defeat it. But I will not let fear decide for me. I will always choose to stand. The princess looked at him for a long moment. Then she turned to her guards. Enough. He has proven his words. The Guardian powered down, returning to the energy field. The servants slowly rose, whispering among themselves. None could believe what they had seen. A human, a simple farmer, had stood against one of the Empire's strongest machines and lived. The princess walked beside Daniel now, her voice lower, almost thoughtful. You are different, human. When others face me, they see only death. You see something else. Tell me why. Daniel answered, his voice firm but gentle. Because you are not only a princess of power. You are a person too. And a person deserves to be seen, not only feared. For the first time in her life, the princess felt something she could not name. It was not the trembling fear she inspired in others. It was not obedience born of terror. It was respect, freely given, without chains. And in that moment, she wondered if this human, standing beside her, might show her a truth she had never dared to seek. The chamber grew quiet again after the Guardian returned to its cage. The servants still whispered, and the guards still looked uneasy, but the test was over. The princess walked slowly across the room, her silver gown brushing the floor like flowing water. Daniel followed beside her, steady and calm. She glanced at him, her glowing eyes softer now. Do you wonder why I carry this fear with me, Daniel? Why every step I take fills others with silence? Daniel looked at her without hesitation. I have wondered. Fear is powerful, but it is also heavy. No one should carry it alone. His words touched something deep inside her. For years she had stood wrapped in strength, her presence alone enough to make entire halls fall silent. She had believed it was her fate, that she was meant to walk alone because her power made her untouchable. But this human's words began to stir doubts she had long buried. Since I was young, she began, her voice low, fear has followed me. Even my parents, the rulers of the empire, stepped back when I entered a room. They said it was destiny, that my markings, my power, were gifts of the stars. But to me, they felt like chains. Children avoided me. Servants whispered about curses. No one ever laughed when I was near. No one ever treated me as anything but danger. They moved into another hall, this one lined with tall windows that showed the endless stars. Daniel listened closely, saying nothing, allowing her story to unfold. I was trained to rule through fear, the princess continued. My tutors told me respect could not last, but fear would. They said worlds would bow if they trembled at my name. And so I became the storm they wanted. I let my presence crush others. I wore the mask of power. But behind the mask, I was alone. No friend dared stay near me. No ally looked me in the eye. Even my counsel serves because they fear what will happen if they resist. Not because they trust me. She paused, turning her gaze toward the stars beyond the glass. Do you know what it is to be surrounded by people, yet always alone? To hear their voices but know none of them see you as more than a shadow? Daniel's voice was calm, steady as always. I know loneliness. Every person does, in some way. But your loneliness is deeper, because fear builds walls. And if all you have are walls, no one can ever step inside. The princess studied him. His words were simple, yet they struck like arrows of truth. No one in her empire had ever dared to speak so plainly. They only bowed and repeated her commands. But here was a human farmer, standing beside her, telling her what she had always known but never admitted. She began walking again, leading him toward another chamber. The floor here was carved with patterns of light that shifted as they stepped upon them. In the center of the chamber was a pool of liquid silver, glowing softly. This is the memory pool of my line, she said. Here are stored the voices of rulers who came before me. They remind me every day of my duty to rule with strength and never weakness. The surface of the pool rippled, and faint voices rose like whispers. The words were in the Seraph tongue, but their tone was heavy, commanding, filled with iron certainty. Daniel could not understand the language, but he understood the weight. The princess looked into the pool. They say fear is the only way. That without fear, empires fall. That trust is fragile, but terror endures. I have followed their path all my life. And yet, when you look at me, you do not tremble. You speak to me as though I am only a person. Daniel stepped closer to the pool, his reflection merging with hers in the silver surface. Because you are. Power is not all you are. You can be feared, yes, but you can also choose to be more than that. Fear may last for a while, but it does not build bridges. It builds emptiness. And no empire can stand forever on emptiness. Her eyes shifted to him, glowing with both fire and something unsteady. You think trust is stronger than fear. I think trust is harder to build, Daniel replied, but once it is real, it is stronger than fear. Fear breaks when power fades. Trust holds even when power is gone. The chamber fell quiet, only the whispers of the pool filling the air. The princess looked at Daniel with something new in her gaze, something she had never offered to anyone else. Not command. Not anger. But curiosity mixed with a strange, quiet hope. They left the chamber and entered a long passage lined with statues of former rulers. Each figure wore a stern face, carved to inspire dread. The princess stopped at one statue, her hand brushing across the stone. All who came before me chose to be remembered through fear. And yet, when I see their faces, I feel nothing. Not pride. Not comfort. Only cold. Daniel studied the statue, then turned to her. Maybe it is time for something different. Maybe you could be the first to be remembered not as a storm, but as a light. Her lips parted slightly at his words. She had never imagined another way. For so long, her path had been written by tradition, carved by the voices of her ancestors. But this human, with no weapon, no throne, no army, spoke as if he saw roads she had never dared to walk. As they continued down the passage, the princess found her steps slowing. Her mind was filled with questions. Could she truly rule without fear? Could she allow herself to be seen, not as a weapon, but as a person? The thought was both terrifying and freeing. Daniel walked at her side, steady as always. His presence was not loud, but it was strong in its own way. He did not kneel, yet he did not challenge her with pride. He simply stood as her equal, and that equality felt more powerful than all the trembling of her empire's subjects. By the time they reached the end of the hall, the princess knew her world had shifted. She was no longer only the figure of fear. She was a ruler with a choice. And this human, this farmer from a distant colony, had given her something no empire had ever offered. He had given her the courage to imagine another way. The halls of the Seraph ship stretched long and endless, glowing faintly with patterns of light that shifted like living rivers. As the princess walked, her gown brushing the floor, Daniel remained by her side. Neither spoke for a moment. The silence was not heavy now, but thoughtful, as though both carried questions that had no easy answers. At last, the princess broke the quiet. You speak of trust as if it were stronger than fear. Yet trust can be broken. I have seen allies betray each other, rulers lose faith in their people, even families torn apart because trust was fragile. Daniel nodded. You are right. Trust can be broken. It takes longer to build, and it can be shattered in a single moment. But fear does not last either. It holds people only as long as the power behind it remains. When that power fades, fear disappears too. Trust, if real, can last even when power is gone. They entered another chamber, wide and tall, filled with star maps. Holograms of entire galaxies floated in the air, glowing with colors brighter than gems. Servants moved carefully around the edges of the chamber, bowing low whenever the princess passed. None dared raise their heads. Their fear was plain in their trembling hands. Daniel's eyes lingered on them. Do you see how they move? Every action comes from fear. They serve you, yes, but do you think they would stand by you if your power vanished? The princess looked at her servants. Their bent backs and lowered faces reflected what she had always known but never admitted. She felt no comfort in their obedience, only distance. You see much for one who is not trained in politics or war, she said softly. Daniel's voice was steady. I do not need training to see people. I work the land, I live among neighbors. I know when someone respects me and when someone only obeys because they have no choice. The princess slowed her steps. She turned her gaze toward the galaxy map, the glowing stars spinning in slow circles. Do you believe your people, the humans, live without fear? Daniel smiled faintly. No. Humans fear many things. We fear the dark, the unknown, even each other at times. But the difference is that we face our fear together. We speak of it, we share it, and we learn from it. Fear can guide us, but it does not chain us. That is what makes us strong. His words settled into her mind like seeds. She thought of her empire, ruled by silence and obedience. She thought of her council, always careful, never honest. She thought of the statues of rulers past, remembered only as storms of terror. And then she thought of Daniel, who stood before her without chains, without trembling. "You are strange, human," she said at last. "Strange, but perhaps wise." They continued walking until they reached a balcony that opened into the stars. The great window stretched from floor to ceiling, showing endless space, with glowing clusters and spinning worlds scattered like jewels across the dark. The princess stepped forward and rested her hand lightly on the glass. Daniel joined her, his eyes wide at the sight. "This is the empire I will rule one day," she said. "Worlds without number. Armies without end. And yet, when I look at it, all I feel is distance. All I see is silence." Daniel turned to her. "Maybe that is because you are looking at it alone. Even with all your power, even with all these stars, you are still alone. But you do not have to be." Her head tilted slightly, her glowing eyes watching him. "And you believe trust could change that?" "Yes," Daniel said simply. "Fear builds walls. Trust builds bridges. If you want to be remembered as more than another shadow in stone, you must choose to build bridges. Not with weapons. Not with chains. But with truth." The princess felt something stir within her. His words lit a spark she had never dared to let burn. For the first time in her life, she wondered if her destiny could be different from the path carved by her ancestors. But doubt lingered. "If I try to rule with trust, my council will call it weakness. My empire will call it betrayal. And my enemies will call it foolishness. How can I stand against all of them?" Daniel's gaze did not waver. "You stand the same way you stood against me. You walk forward. You choose not to bow to fear, even when the world tells you to. You have more strength than you know. But true strength is not in making others afraid. True strength is in giving them a reason to stand with you, even when they are afraid." Her eyes glowed brighter, not with fury this time, but with something more alive. Hope, fragile but real, flickered within her. She looked back out at the stars, the empire spread before her, and for the first time, she imagined it not ruled by chains of terror but guided by a bond stronger than fear. Behind them, the guards stood silently, confused by what they were hearing. The servants still bowed, too frightened to raise their eyes. None of them could understand the shift happening within their ruler. But Daniel could see it. He could see that the storm inside her was beginning to change. The princess turned to him at last. "If what you say is true, then everything I have been taught is a lie. My whole life has been built on fear. And yet, when I look at you, I see another path. You stand without bowing. You speak without trembling. You face me as though I am simply human." Daniel met her gaze calmly. "That is because you are. You are more than the mask they gave you. You are more than the fear they want you to carry. You are a person, and you have the right to choose what kind of ruler you want to be." The princess drew in a deep breath. The stars beyond the glass seemed brighter now, as if the universe itself waited for her choice. For the first time in her life, she felt the chains of fear loosen. She did not break them yet, but she knew the human's words had given her the key. She looked at him with something no one had ever seen in her eyes. Not fire. Not command. But respect. "Perhaps," she said quietly, "you are the first to truly see me." And with those words, the storm within her shifted again, no longer only a force of fear, but a force searching for light. The princess walked through the vast halls of her ship, Daniel following close behind. The silence that surrounded them was different now. It was no longer heavy with fear. It was filled with questions, with thoughts, with the possibility of something new. The ship, massive and alive, seemed to sense the shift in her. The lights glowed a little softer, the hum of energy a little gentler, as though it responded to her changing heart. They reached the council chamber, the largest room in the ship. Its walls were carved from black stone, and at its center stood a long table where the Empire's leaders had gathered. When they saw the princess and the human, their expressions froze. Murmurs ran through the chamber. Every council member had expected her to command, to strike fear, to demand obedience. Instead, she walked in calmly, her eyes glowing not with wrath but with quiet determination. "You have brought a human before us," one of the council members said sharply. "Princess, he has disrespected you. He must be punished." The princess raised her hand, and the room fell silent. "No," she said. Her voice, strong and clear, filled the chamber. "He will not be punished. I have watched him, and he has shown more courage than most of you have in your lives. He has spoken truth where others only obeyed." The council exchanged shocked glances. Some whispered, others clenched their fists. No one had ever seen the princess speak in such a way. Obedience was law. Fear was power. Yet here she stood, defying every rule they had learned since childhood. A council member, bold enough to speak, stepped forward. "Princess, you are weak if you allow this human to live. If you follow his foolish ways, the empire will fall. Are you prepared to risk everything for his words?" The princess met his gaze, unflinching. "I am prepared to risk everything for truth. For too long, I have led through fear. My empire bows to terror, my council serves through obedience, and my people live in silence. That is not strength. That is weakness disguised as power. I will no longer rule that way." Daniel watched silently, amazed at her courage. His presence had sparked something in her that no one else could. He had shown her a perspective she had never considered. Fear had been her shield, her weapon, her armor. But it had also been her prison. The council members shook with anger and disbelief. "You would abandon our ways? You would betray the empire?" another asked. "I would abandon nothing," the princess said. "I would choose a new way. One where trust is stronger than fear. One where respect is given freely, not forced through trembling. One where courage is measured not by obedience, but by choice." The chamber fell silent. Some of the council members whispered nervously. Others stared at her, unable to comprehend her words. The human, Daniel, stood beside her quietly. He had no army, no power, yet his influence on her was undeniable. The princess turned toward the chamber doors and looked out at the stars. "I will not be the ruler who spreads terror. I will be the ruler who inspires courage. Those who follow me must do so not because they fear, but because they choose to. That is the empire I will build." The council erupted into shouting. Some demanded her obedience, some threatened rebellion, and others simply tried to flee. But she stood firm, her presence calm and unshakable. She raised her hands, and the energy of the ship responded. A hum filled the chamber, vibrating through the stone walls. The council members froze, unsure if this was power or warning. Daniel stepped forward and spoke, his voice carrying across the room. "Princess is right. Fear may rule for a time, but courage and choice build a lasting foundation. You have all followed fear for too long. You have obeyed because you were told to, not because you believed. That ends now. The future will be different, and it begins with trust. The room grew quiet again. The council members stared at him, then at the princess. Their eyes slowly shifted from fear to confusion, and then to a hesitant understanding. Some bowed slightly, not in fear, but in realization that their world was changing. The princess lowered her hands and looked at Daniel. You have given me something no one else could. You have shown me that strength is not in fear, but in courage and choice. For that, I am grateful. Daniel smiled faintly. It was not only my courage. It was yours too. You chose to listen, to see beyond fear, to imagine something different. That choice is what makes you strong. The chamber remained still for a long moment. Then one of the council members, an elder with eyes like polished stone, stepped forward. Perhaps we have been wrong, he said. Perhaps we have forgotten what it means to lead with honor. Princess, if you truly believe this path is right, we will follow you. Another council member nodded. The Empire has feared you for long enough. If you lead with courage, not terror, then maybe we can follow willingly. The princess felt a weight lift from her shoulders. The fear that had clung to her since childhood, the fear that had always been her constant companion, began to loosen. For the first time, she felt the freedom to lead as she chose. She was still powerful. She was still the princess of the Seraph Empire. But now, she would also be a ruler of respect, trust, and courage. She turned to Daniel, her eyes glowing softly. You have changed more than you know. My empire will no longer rule through fear. It will rule with choice, with courage, and with honor. And you, human, have shown me the way. Daniel bowed his head slightly. It was never my goal to change your empire. I only hope to show you that fear is not the only path. The choice was always yours. The princess reached out and placed a hand lightly on his shoulder. And I choose to see a new way. A way where everyone can stand tall, not because they tremble, but because they are brave. That is the choice I make today. Outside the chamber, the galaxy spread wide and bright. The stars seemed to shine a little warmer, the darkness a little less threatening. The empire would not change overnight, but the first step had been taken. The princess had chosen courage, and that choice would echo across the stars. The council members stood quietly, understanding that their world was shifting. Some were still hesitant, others fearful of the unknown, but all felt the weight of the princess's decision. She had chosen a path no one expected, and it was powerful in ways they could not yet measure. And Daniel, standing beside her, realized that his presence, his courage, and his simple choice to stand had changed not just one ruler, but the course of an entire empire. The princess turned back to him, her voice soft but strong. The empire will follow a new path now, human. And you will walk beside me to guide this change. Are you ready for that? Daniel smiled. I am ready. Together, they stepped forward, side by side, into a future that no one could predict, but one that held the promise of courage, trust, and freedom. The halls of the Seraph ship were no longer filled with fear. The air itself felt lighter, as though the decision the princess had made had changed the very atmosphere. Guards walked with steadier steps, and servants no longer trembled at her presence. The empire's greatest weapon, the princess herself, had chosen courage over terror. And beside her stood Daniel, the human who had sparked that change. They entered the observation deck, a wide room of glass and light. The stars stretched endlessly, worlds spinning in their own orbits, galaxies distant and brilliant. The vastness of space reminded them both how small they were, and yet how much their choices could shape the universe. The princess turned to Daniel, her glowing eyes softer now, carrying warmth instead of fire. "When I first met you," she said quietly, "I thought you were foolish. A human, standing before a princess, unarmed and unafraid. And yet, you were not foolish. You were brave. You were the first to see me, not the storm I have always been told to be." Daniel smiled faintly. "I did not see you as a storm. I saw a person who was taught to hide behind fear. You had the strength to rule empires, yes, but strength is nothing without choice. You chose courage, and that made all the difference." The princess looked at him, the hum of the ship around them almost gentle now. For years, she had never known what it meant to be truly seen, truly understood. Her empire had bowed to her, yes, but out of terror. Her council had obeyed, yes, but out of fear. And her people had stayed silent, yes, but out of uncertainty. No one had ever truly acknowledged her as a being capable of more than her power. "You have given me that recognition," she said softly. "Not with force, not with command, but simply by standing tall. You have shown me that strength is not in making others afraid, but in inspiring them to be brave alongside you." Daniel nodded. "Fear is easy. Courage is harder. But the reward is worth it. You will see that your people can follow you freely, and their loyalty will be stronger than fear could ever make it." The princess turned to the wide window that showed the stars. Her mind raced with possibilities. A ruler who commands by fear may be obeyed, but a ruler who leads by courage may be followed with hearts willing. She had never dared imagine such a path. Yet now, Daniel had shown it to her. And for the first time, she felt the weight of her destiny shift from chains to wings. "Then we will do it together," she said, turning to him. "I will change my empire. We will build trust, inspire courage, and lead not through terror, but through choice. Will you walk beside me in this?" Daniel smiled, calm and steady. "I will. That is why I am here." The princess's hand moved lightly to rest on his shoulder. In that simple gesture was a bond stronger than any army, stronger than any council, stronger than any fear she had carried her entire life. It was the bond of trust, the bond of courage, the bond that would guide her empire into a new era. Outside, the stars glimmered like distant promises. The empire would not change overnight. There would be those who resisted, those who clung to the old ways. But the seed had been planted, and the first step had been taken. The princess had chosen courage, and she would not turn back. For the first time, she felt the presence of others without fear. The guards now followed her out of respect, not trembling. The council, while hesitant, began to listen, realizing that the strength of a ruler is not measured in the silence of her subjects but in the willingness of them to stand with her. The servants moved freely, their heads lifted, no longer shrinking at her steps. The princess turned back to Daniel, her voice filled with quiet confidence. "Today, I do not feel alone. For the first time, I see that even a ruler can have allies who stand because they believe, not because they fear. You have shown me that possibility." Daniel nodded. "You do not need fear to lead. You need courage, honesty, and the willingness to trust others. That is the path to a lasting empire." Her eyes glowed softly in the starlight. "Then we will walk that path together. I will learn from you, and you will help me understand humanity. And together, perhaps we can teach the universe a new way to lead." The stars outside seemed to shine a little brighter. The princess felt something she had never felt before, hope. For so long, her life had been shadowed by power and fear, by isolation and distance. But now, with Daniel at her side, she saw a future where her empire could thrive not through terror, but through courage and trust. She took a deep breath. This is more than a choice for me. This is a choice for everyone under my rule. For the first time, I see that strength and compassion are not opposites. They are partners. And together, we can make something greater than either could alone. Daniel looked out at the stars with her, silent for a moment. You are ready for this. You have the courage. And with it, the empire will follow. The princess smiled, a genuine smile, warm and real. She turned back to the room and saw her council, her guards, and her servants looking at her with new understanding. Some still carried doubt, but all were seeing her differently. They no longer saw only power and fear. They saw the beginning of something extraordinary. Then let us begin, she said, her voice strong, clear, and certain. The empire will follow a new path. One of courage, trust, and choice. And we will build it together, human and Serath, side by side. Daniel nodded. And the universe will see what true courage can do. The princess took another look at the stars, imagining the worlds she would touch, the people she would inspire, and the future she could shape. She felt no fear, only determination and hope. The empire had changed, not because she demanded it, but because she chose a new way. And the human who had stood before her with calm courage had shown her the path. She turned to Daniel, and they walked together toward the command room, the beginning of their journey to reshape the empire. For the first time in her life, she felt that she was not alone. She had an ally, a guide, and a friend. Humanity had taught her that courage can break the chains of fear, and she would never forget it. As the ship moved through the stars, the princess and the human walked side by side. The galaxy stretched endlessly before them, full of possibilities. For the first time, the princess felt free, and the human who had shown her the way smiled quietly, knowing that they were both part of a story that would change everything. The empire would never be the same. The princess would never be the same. And humanity had shown that even the smallest act of courage could ignite a change that stretched across the stars.